I think we're live. We are. We're live. Yay! Hi. So, okay, off guard. I saw that I was looking at pictures instead of the countdown. Welcome to the virtual breakout for security professionals. Thank you to the Providence Business News and the Tech Collective for having us, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'm Doug White. I'm the chair of the Cybersecurity Networking Department at Roger Williams University, and I'm the host of Security Weekly News at Security Weekly. And today's topic is called ransomware, the next step in the kill chain. And I started getting interested in this because of what I call an infinite series problem. Basically, I've been phishing people as part of pen tests since the very first time I ever tried it in like 1986. And if you have enough tries, you will eventually get somebody to click that link. I mean, that's going to happen. It just works. That's why people keep doing it. So we spend a lot of time and money on training people to not get phished, and that helps, I'm sure. But Anna, Mark, and Sujit all walk past the free taco flash drive on the ground. But Doug really likes tacos and picks up the free taco flash drive and takes it inside and, infinite series. So eventually somebody's going to pick up the free taco flash drive and you're going to have a problem. So I decided we should talk a little bit about not what is this, we all know what it is, and not how do you train people better, but what happens then? So it's going to happen. So maybe we should be looking at the next steps and how can we limit like damage when somebody clicks the free taco link. So as such, I assembled a crack panel. Actually, I didn't. I'm just lying. But to give you some insights on this problem. And we're going to have questions at the end. So if you want to post your questions in the chat, and then I will read them to the panelists at the end of the session. So we're going to save some time out for that. First up on my panel is David Sun, who it seems like I have known for a really long time. He's been around in this business for a long while. And David is a digital forensics and security partner at Blum Shapiro. And David runs the cyber forensics and data breach response practice. He's a testifying expert and has been involved in various high-profile matters, including the Capital One data breach and Hillary Clinton email controversy. We shouldn't even say that. You shouldn't have started on that. Our second esteemed panelist is O'Shea Bowens, who I've known, I think, for a while. He's been on Security Weekly and something like that. He is a cybersecurity enthusiast with a decade of information security experience. O'Shea is the founder and CEO of Null Hat Security LLC, which focuses on threat hunting, security analytics, cybersecurity skills assessment, and cyber threat intelligence. O'Shea has worked and consulted for companies and clients in the space of the federal government, Fortune 500, and international firms. And when he's not at a keyboard, he's snowboarding somewhere on Earth and preventing me all my nice lines on my skis. But I know that battle's over, but it's still there. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And thanks all of you in the audience who have tuned in today for hopefully what will be quite interesting to me anyway, which is what it's all about. It's always just about me. So the first question that we really want to take up is to let David take over for a minute and tell us a little bit about how ransomware frameworks have evolved in the last years or so, and where you think that's going in terms of what is the next step in that kill chain. Okay, David?
Sure. So for those of you who were in the keynote there, Tom from the FBI actually hit on a number of the points, but I think there's a few that we want to reiterate. Ransomware is here to stay. It's getting worse, right? The attacks are getting more sophisticated. The nation states are involved. The fallout of the attack is getting broader. Ransomware is no longer just about, do you have a good backup program or not? And if so, great. And if not, all right. It's beyond encrypting your data. They're doing the data exfiltration is very common. And what they've done is they've converted it from holding your data hostage to holding your reputation hostage, right? And so backups don't fix that. And now it's becoming a full-blown crisis. It can end a company. Ransomware starts. I'm seeing ransomware. The initial ask, or it starts with $100,000 if you're a smaller organization, if you can negotiate them down, and we're getting into the millions routinely now. And so again, it's not just a problem for IT, are your backups in place? It's a legal problem. It's a marketing and a PR problem. All those things are there. You have legal issues from the data breach regulations that are out there, the laws that have been put in place as to if you have a data breach, you need to report it. If you don't report it, you're going to get subject to fines, legal action, and ransomware in many states is considered to be a data breach because you've lost control of your data. Again, lots of all the different departments of company are getting involved in ransomware or being impacted by ransomware. It's really not an IT problem anymore. But IT still leads the battle. Okay, I think that's the important part. So what can you do, right? And that's what this talk is about. We're here trying to talk about how we can focus on the kill chain, the cyber kill chain. We have a slide here. If you want to Google kill chain, you can read up all about it. But the idea is that it's a chain of events that need to occur in order for a cyber attack to be successful. You're starting off with recon and weaponization of assets, delivering a payload, which nowadays is just email, right? It's so easy. You don't even need to walk in anymore to insert the USB drive. But then you get into the exploitation and the installation aspect of things, and really that's where we want to focus on, right? Because again, we've trained users. Don't click on the link. Don't click on the link, right? Don't let that payload be successfully delivered. We train them. We did that job, but the problem is people will still click, right? They still want that free taco, like Doug said. And so we really, as IT practitioners, need to focus on what happens when they click. The old saying, right? It's not a matter of if you've been hacked, it's when you get hacked, right? I mean, that really is the case these days. So we need to focus on things like execution, privilege escalation, lateral movement. That's the exploitation install aspect of the kill chain, and that's really where we need to start spending our technical attention on. So, I talked about, and Doug, if you can go to the next slide, one of the things that people are doing is the newer techniques are using GPOs to prevent software execution. So Microsoft has a GPO you can configure called software restriction policy. And basically what you can do is you can blacklist or whitelist, programs and areas. So to make it easy for technical people, you can do a GPO that makes it so people cannot execute or run exe, batch files, Visual Basic scripts, PowerShells, all those things. They cannot execute those things from app data, right? What programs legitimately would run an exe from app data? Only probably something you downloaded off the internet, right? So configuring a GPO that at the endpoint level doesn't allow users to run these executables and binaries out of app data. That instantly reduces your attack surface. Something else you can do at a server level or on system level is you can say, all right, I'm going to take a step further. Instead of you can't run anything in app data, let's say you're not able to run any executables that aren't in your Windows system directory, program files, and programs x86, right? So if it's not a program that was installed in these directories, you can't run it. Again, it takes the app data concept and takes it one step further. And now we're saying, instead of blacklisting a directory, we're whitelisting directories, right? That can make a pretty big impact. And so, those are some things to consider. And I got some screenshots here for the technical people. GPO. That's what the software restriction policy, that GPO is there. Doug, we go to the next one. You can see just a couple of the configuration dialog boxes where you can decide what to restrict and what to do. And if we go to the last one, the next one, you can see here's GPO that's restricting execution from anything except system root and program files, right? So that's an example of a GPO you can push out on your organization. It will reduce the attack surface. You can take this a step further. You can say not only will you restrict any programs that aren't in system directory and program files and program x86, but you can even take it a step further and say, you know what, I'm going to restrict execution of VSS admin, right, which is the volume shadow copy, the volume shadow service, right? that is what ransomware guys use to delete your volume shadow copies and reduce the ability for you to recover data through volume shadow copies. You can restrict and access running of WMIC, which is a huge suite of Windows control tools. You can restrict execution of PowerShell, right? Again, pick the right thing for your organization. But this is where we need to. This is where the front line has moved to. Okay, these seem like big. I'm sure these things seem like big challenges to implement. But that you can add exceptions to these rules. You can whitelist things. If you use the SRP GPO, it will actually throw an event in the application event log for when somebody tries to run something, but it was blocked by the SRP. So you can, monitor your application event logs to then, understand what is being blocked and determine if it's a bad thing that should have been blocked, you got a problem, or if it was a legitimate program, and then you can use that to start generating, adding it to your whitelist, so to speak. These techniques have been around for a while, but we don't see many people using them, right? Just because it seems like a big challenge to implement this at organization. But this is where it's going. One of the things that Windows has done to make things a little easier, Microsoft's done to make it a little easier, they've introduced App Locker, which is a new platform. It's really the successor to SRP. So what I just told you is all kind of a little bit outdated, right? But it's all still there. It's old school, right? App Locker is the successor. And you can run that on servers. The problem for most organizations is App Locker is not available on Windows 10 unless you are at the enterprise level, right? So you got to get the enterprise licensing, which most organizations don't, unless you're a really big one. So a lot of organizations will use a combination of App Locker on the server and SRPs on the endpoints. But the nice thing about App Locker is you can control things through AD groups now. So you can say VSS admin cannot be run by anybody unless they're in the administrator group. I'm not saying that's the right rule, because most ransomware attackers will add an account into the administrator group, okay? But you get the idea in that you can, App Locker will give you more granular control of some of this stuff. So that's part of what needs to be done. That's one step of the kill chain. Other steps in the kill chain is addressing privilege escalation, right? I mean, that's what the hackers are trying to do. When they come in, they're trying to escalate privilege. They're trying to get to that admin login, and that's what they're going to do. So the first thing is, don't make it easier for them, right? Don't let users be local admin. That's just asking for problems. There are tools out there. Mimikatz is a very prevalent tool. They will drop Mimikatz. What's Mimikatz? Mimikatz is basically a credential dumping tool. Doug, you want to go to the next screen? And I show a screenshot of Mimikatz being run, and you can see in there, it's just a command line tool. You run it, and it dumps part of the drive, part of the system data, and it will show you the username and what their domain is and what their password is, as you can see highlighted in yellow there. And if your IT guy has stopped by on the computer and had to do something and shoot something, and maybe they logged in as either a domain admin or their own IT credentials, where they are a domain admin, those credentials get cached on that local system, right? And so when you run Mimikatz, you're going to dump all the cached credentials, and that's what they do, right? They are going to get a domain admin, even if the user isn't a domain admin. If they can run Mimikatz, we'll talk about how they can do that. But if they can run Mimikatz, they'll be able to dump somebody else's domain credentials off the system. Now, how do they do that? If you're smart and they don't have local admin, if you've got a relatively tight ship and your users aren't running local admin, how can they access that? Well, the problem is there's a lot of vulnerabilities on their machines, as you guys know, that will allow privilege escalation, right? So they get on a machine where the user isn't local admin, but they find a vulnerability that allows privilege escalation. Then they they exploit that vulnerability using the user's non-administrative credentials, but using that vulnerability can escalate to a local admin. And again, they can use Mimikatz, they can dump the credentials, and that's really what they're looking to do. And then the next step in the kill chain, lateral movement, right? Ransomware's got to spread. Ransomwareing only Joe in accounting who clicked on the link, locking up their box in itself is not gonna necessarily kill a company. But what they want to do is they want to get out across the environment, and they want to do the lateral movement. And they want to get to the file shares and the accounting shares and HR files and all that type of stuff. And so they need to be able to move across your network. And you as a practitioner need to, figure out how to prevent that. And the easy way to do that, or one of the ways that's been around for a very long time, is VLANs with access control lists, right? Does everybody in accounting need to see everybody in engineering, their systems, right? Probably not. Accounting needs to see the accounting server, and that's probably it. Engineering needs to see the engineering share and not the accounting server, right? So you got to split up your environment and make it so that if somebody can get into one system, that they can't get across your environment. And so you want to do some ACLs and divide up your network. So I mean that's sort of the main pieces in terms of what you need to worry about, or what we want to, some of the things to focus on with the kill chain. And then really the last thing I will say is that I'll say, and before I hand it over to O'Shea and back to Doug, is that you really need to be focusing on behavioral analytics. So, the old Norton antivirus, that's signature based, that looks for malware, that is old school. That doesn't work anymore these days, right? This stuff is not going to have recognized signature anymore. What you're looking for instead is not, is this program on a computer or not? Because again, they'll use PowerShell. They'll live off the land, right? They will use tools that are in the system already legitimately, and they will do bad things with it. So what you need is behavioral analysis tools that will look to see, if Bob in accounting is logging into everybody else's computer across the entire network. That's the kind of thing you're looking for these days, the behavioral patterns. Is Bob logging in Sunday 4 a.m.? Is Jane, logging into the email server and then the file server and then two other servers in fairly rapid succession, or touching 10,000 files on the file server? Those are the kinds of things you need to be monitoring for, and that's all behavioral based. And so those are the things to think about. That's the things I'm seeing out there as I'm responding to these data breaches and how the bad guys are getting in. I know there's other ways, and O'Shea's got some pretty cool stuff that he's gonna talk to about about how all this stuff can come pre-packaged by the hackers without having to go through the whole. They drop the kill chain all at once, right? And they climb the chain all at once. So that's something that I'll leave it to O'Shea to talk about.
Okay, thanks, David. But I did want to say that I wrote a lot of test frameworks for ransomware and using Emotet as a basis. And what David is telling you is just right on the money. That next step is so important to these frameworks, because if they're not written in a really resilient way, the code may stop because it can't execute certain commands. So a lot of these are scripts that are being downloaded, and these GPOs can actually step in to prevent that from execution. In fact, one of the ones we'll talk about a little bit later there was an article yesterday about Raxine, which is a script on GitHub that actually can go in and disable VSS admin and WMIC.exe so that they aren't usable. And again, Emotet and a lot of these other ransomware frameworks start off by trying to delete your shadow copies off the volume. And if they can't do that, we were testing some, and if they can't do that, well, then they may stop running. And if that happens, you may have prevented the ransomware from spreading and or pursuing. Now, that doesn't mean they won't get smarter later. And speaking of getting smarter later, I'll talk to somebody who got smart already. But O'Shea wants to talk to us a little bit about a new tactic that you see from frameworks, which is one of the things that David mentioned at the end there, is trying to stop this stuff by being smarter about behavior and so forth. But even when we get pretty smart and we say we're gonna block Mimi cats, we're gonna block people who try to execute Mimi cat, there's always ways around these things. And one of the ways that I was thinking about earlier this year and saw people doing this was using things like VMs and Dockers. And sure enough, here we go. And so as ransomware continues to evolve, and all the low-hanging fruit is gone, so all those people that are running local users as domain admins have all been hacked to pieces, then people have to work harder to get the same result. So O'Shea, thanks for joining us. And you think maybe you could talk a little bit about running ransomware in VMs and Dockers, and how that kind of distribution is maybe a modern approach and is a lot more dangerous than some of the stuff we've been seeing in the past?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. We used the word smart a few different times in the last like 3 or 4 minutes, and I think that's like a key word to kind of focus in on, right? So what do we know about the attacker landscape? The one thing that is a consistent, is that it always shifts. They go to where they can find the most success, right? So as we've gotten smart with how we deploy or automate or scale within our organization, within our environments, they've caught on to the tools that we leverage there, right? I think one big one I think this is unfortunately going to become much bigger in the future. But what we're starting to see right now, especially over 2019, 2020, has been attackers taking advantage of Docker. And most people are thinking like, what do you mean taking advantage of Docker, right? And yeah, I mean Docker. I mean that tool that you use for deployment and to deploy images kind of rapidly across your environment is can essentially become a mecca for attackers in this day and age. And when you really think about it, it's fairly straightforward, right? What they're trying to do is get the biggest bang for their buck. So what they want to do is try to find some type of either misconfigured or unsecured Docker instance. I'll dive into that in a second. But find some insecure Docker instance and essentially hope and pray that you've made a mistake when it comes to how you configure permissions, and give them a hook in. What we've seen over the past year or so is most of the time when attackers actually obtain access into Docker specifically, they typically leverage it for something like cryptojacking. They like Monero. That's like one of the popular ones over the last year, really, from a cryptojacking perspective and mining perspective. But where you're starting to see this shift, from a delivery perspective to execution, is really leveraging Docker to like act as a launching point for further attacks, right? So what does that process look like? It's not too dissimilar from a typical attack. We start with some type of scanning, right? Except for when you're scanning for Docker instances across the internet, you don't really need to use Nmap. You can that's out the window now. You can throw up like Shodan or Synestis and begin to scan. And if you were to break this down into what the attackers are looking for, they're not looking for Synax, like that's gone, like that's in the past now. What they're really looking for is to really understand what type of responses they can get back by switching up different API parameters, right? So if you think about it from leveraging GET requests, going from like with Docker specifically, like a Git swarm, right? So this should give us an idea of like what type of configuration is available within the Docker environment, right? Or leveraging like container JSON. I think it's container/JSON or JSON/container. Get container/JSON, and what that does is essentially list out all the containers that are within that environment. And the tricky part here is and this isn't to place blame on anyone. I've done this in my own lab, and I've fallen victim to it. Is that when we set up our configuration, the security aspect of this is really based upon establishing of TLS. So if your TLS profile isn't 100%, then that essentially means that anyone else can attempt to authenticate to that Docker instance with a totally separate certificate, right? The whole purpose of leveraging TLS is that only specifically signed certificates should be able to interact with your container. When that goes down by the wayside, you can find yourself in like a whole heap of trouble in regards to different individuals out there on the web attempting to pull information from your Docker instance and from your Docker containers and leverage that against you, right? So again, keeping in line with the kill chain, right? So we're still at the delivery part. We're looking to go to execution, but what does that look like from a Docker perspective? So I'll give 3 quick examples in regards to like how bad, how quick and bad this can go. One would be, an individual is able to deploy a container image with like malicious code. So it's not really about getting shell on the box anymore. Not necessarily about getting shell. That is something that's not a really big concern. My goal as the attacker is to really understand, hey, can I throw another image inside this container? Be it because maybe TLS wasn't totally configured, or maybe other security parameters for protection of that Docker instance weren't really totally configured correctly. Can I pop an image in there and then circumvent this whole all the company's defenses, right? If I'm able to populate an image, popping an image into that container, well, I'm not really too worried about your EDR solutions or firewall, right? I can go right around that because now I'm able to deploy an image which I can have a C2 channel baked into that image in a binary, and that calls out, and I can pull down the rest of my payloads, and boom, I'm off to the races, right? Another example of that is really like deploying images and containers that may actually download payloads at the time they execute. So thinking about this from deploying an image that has malicious code, what happens when you actually are able to deploy Docker hosts and then put more payloads inside of them, and then they're downloaded and executed inside of another container. So if instead of me actually replacing one image for a container, I just find myself hooked into another image I was able to authenticate to, another container I was able to authenticate to, use that as my launching pad and start to pull down other badness that I can leverage to either begin to laterally move across the environment or move into other stages of the attack. All of this is not, it's happening, and like not as we speak right now, but it has happened. And most research shows that it's on an uptick. Attackers are getting much better at finding these instances and actually exploiting them. And is it that they've become much more clever, or there's just more attackers? There's an attacker tree and they're falling out of there, but like they're dropping like raindrops or whatever. It's like, no, it's really because we have found ourselves in the position where we want to automate, we want to scale up. So we're leveraging more of these automation tools, but we're just not properly configuring them. So little things like these lead to, pretty huge consequences from a defensive perspective. But when I think about, well, crap, what can I do as a sysadmin or maybe a DevOps individual, or not even just a DevOps individual? Because I know people tend to shift the blame or the burden onto, well, you're in DevOps, you need to understand how you should secure that. My thinking has always been, me as a defender, someone who's pretty much operated on cyber defense or C&D for the entirety of my career, it's really more on me to share different tips or different techniques that can help secure the environment in general, right? It doesn't matter what team they're on. So as security practitioners, I recommend, look at the best place to actually understand how to actually circumvent or secure your Docker instances is CIS, right? CIS's benchmark has been around for almost like 2 decades. And I believe it was late 2018 or maybe early 2019, they came out with a benchmark for Docker. I know a lot of people don't actually read that because like you hear CIS and you automatically want to go to sleep. But this is like one of those times, I think it's like very valuable to take. Yeah, seriously,
please.
Yeah, it drops so many little nuggets in there. Like for instance, like just understanding how, like, hey, if you're going to leverage different containers, maybe set an image on the storage amount, right? So if you set a limit on the storage amount, it pretty much forces your sysadmins and DevOps to have to spin up multiple containers versus continuously adding more and more data to one container. So if something were to happen to that one particular container, all the information there is owned. But if you have it dispersed and spread out across your swarm, you have a better chance of like properly defending yourself, because the attackers have to jump from point to point to point to actually pull that type of data down, right? Like something like that is invaluable, and it's super easy to do. Maybe I'll have to drop the CIS benchmarks link inside a chat. Another area that we spoke about, which kind of comes back to the Maze ransomware. I think Maze is like the Justin Bieber of ransomware for this year, but is another delivery mechanism which is starting to, which is really on an uptick, I guess you could say, not to put a happy face on it. It's really, leveraging like bundled VMs to deploy within an environment. So what the heck do I mean by that? This one's super simple. It's actually kind of creepy how easy you can get away with this. So what I mean is that what attackers have done is essentially shift to understanding that, hey, most environments from an organizational perspective are going to allow some part of their staff to deploy VMs. Not from a massive scale perspective, but just on a simple machine. Think about you as a defender or maybe whatever IT role you're in. Do you have the ability to download VirtualBox right now and deploy that? There's a good chance you probably can. So what attackers have done is they begin to kind of shift the way that they think about, well, again, how can I move from delivery to execution to exploit in a much more rampant fashion. And a good way to do that, not a good way, but what we're seeing people do is essentially bundle VMs into into other files. So with Maze specifically, over the last 5 or 6 months, what we've seen are attacks where uh, attackers are actually taking like MSI Microsoft installer bundles, which are fairly small in their size, right? So these are like, we'll say maybe less than 1,000 megabytes. So not something that's totally going to trigger if you're looking for like large downloads if you're threat hunting and searching for like large downloads within your environment. This may not be something that pops up on the radar, or maybe it doesn't pop up as something suspicious from a SIM or maybe an EDR perspective. But they're taking these really, really small MSIs and packaging them with a Windows 7 or Windows 10 installation. And then once they actually pack with the Windows 7 or Windows 10 installation, what they're hoping to do is what they're hoping is that you as a victim download that MSI and execute that. And inside that MSI is and typically an older instance of VirtualBox. So you're not going to see something that's a version from 2020 or 2019. Usually they're going to go a couple versions back. That's simply because it allows them to run in a headless capacity much easier. There's more add-ons that they can leverage in that headless capacity. So when I say headless, what that essentially means is they're able to, or you can do this yourself actually, where you're able to run VirtualBox essentially without kind of the GUI interface, right? So you don't see the GUI, you don't see the icon, none of that stuff really pops up. All you really see if you're searching for it, let's say let's say from task schedule, like most of us default there when something goes wrong. Like, why is my PowerPoint failing? You look at your tasks and you're trying to understand what the heck is going on. The only thing you're really going to see is some type of like VM exe. You may see some type of reference to the process that is responsible for spawning VM, but that's about it. And most users aren't really looking for that. They're not really reviewing their tasks on a day-to-day basis. And even if you are reviewing your tasks on a day-to-day basis, even if your EDR does pick up that VM exe is running, there's a chance, specifically if you're in IT, that's normal for you. You're like, well, maybe I was doing something and I forgot to shut it down, whatever, right? But that's kind of what they're hoping for. So inside of this bundle, there's typically about 3 or 4 different files that they're looking for. They need the VM exe, they need the executable, they need some type of bat file, and then they need a DLL. The DLL is really kind of the hook here. So once you click this MSI file that's been bundled with the VM executes, goes headless. Some of the things that you're likely to encounter if you're trying to hunt for this within your environment or search for this from a defensive perspective, what you're likely going to see is that machine immediately try to connect itself to the network, right? And that should be a big no right off the bat. You should never, even if you're for testing purposes within an environment on a security team, you never really want that your virtual machine to essentially share the same network as your host. That's always a bad thing. It leads to bad stuff. Just don't do it, right? But you're going to see activity where the VM essentially tries to jump on the network. You're going to see the activity where the VM essentially tries to share documents. They're going to use add-ons like drop and share within VirtualBox, which allows you to move from host to VM and share files. Right, all these kind of really normal activities that I know for sure I've done it, but normal activities that may occur just by leveraging a VirtualBox really turns against you, right? And once they actually have that hook in, they've mounted either a file share or they're leveraging like the share and drop add-on within VirtualBox. That's their persistence right then and there, right? So once that is hooked in, all they're going to do is essentially shut down the VM and wait for you to kind of run that MSI again. And once they run that MSI, now you're presented with I think there were a couple of slides, a couple of presentations earlier where individuals were showing, the welcoming message. I use welcoming lightly, but the welcoming messages from May's ransomware, right? So now it's time to pay up in some type of Bitcoin. And that's really the sketchy part. This isn't these aren't like multi-pronged stage attacks where it's it's beyond our fathom to actually catch this. This is something that's super simple. Like, hey, if you allow individuals to run VMs within your environment, there's a pretty strong chance that you want someone to actually be responsible for deploying those VMs, right? You have assigned image, you have assigned instances that are handed down from some type of system administrator or some type of IT department. What you don't want to do is find yourself in a position where any individual can fall victim to some type of bundled attack. And again, this is just like, I hate to say it, I think it's more still in its infancy. Like the attackers are getting much better at how they deploy this. Right now it's Windows 10, it's Windows 7, but eventually, I do remember while I was researching this that they were essentially sorting out how to run this within a Linux environment too. So what happens when there's a couple different it's really a clickbait game in some ways when you think about it, right? Like you as a user, you're thinking, hey, where can I get a Windows 7 VM? Where can I get a Windows 10 VM? Where can I get that Ubuntu VM? Where can I get that Red Hat VM, right? So the more water holes that they attempt to poison, and this goes back to actually sharing it, not goes back, but this kind of puts me on the point of actually sharing information. So when you see that, specific vendors have been hacked, or specifically vendors that actually you purchase images from, like that's something that you definitely want to pay attention to from a security perspective within your environment, because there's a good chance you may actually leverage that specific vendor, or you may leverage one specific website that actually hosts some of these images. And when they fall victim, or when they're attacked, when they're attacked, what the hackers have essentially done is poison really the watering hole. This is where we go to get a bunch of our images, to get our VMs. Once that's kind of like fallen by the wayside, then their foothold and their exposure kind of drastically increases, to be honest. I like to keep things like super, super simple. So when I think about how you actually avoid this, one is like don't allow people to throw VMs within your environment, right? And that may be easier said than done. Good luck. Yeah, I know. So if you are going to allow them to actually deploy within the environment, this is where you have to kind of take, you kind of have to take it by the reins. Well, fine, you can deploy a VM within our environment, but it must adhere to these specific settings that we've created for the GPO policies or for the policies for the VM. There is no sharing of the network. There is no mounting of any shares to the host machine. There is no transfer of files across any host machines. Even then, you can become a bit more granular in regards to what you restrict from a network and an internet perspective. You can still implement a GPO policy that you've taken from, let's say, your proxy or Zscalers or something along those lines, and drop it into the VM to stop individuals from surfing to potentially malicious websites, right? So there's still a way to kind of gain control, but you have to be fairly aggressive about that. I think we have some questions, but I'll wrap up by just saying, take advantage of some of the research that's out there, specifically around the Docker side. The Docker stuff is what scares me the most, because that's in so many different organizations, but also take some time to really understand how bundled VM attacks work. Yeah, we can go into questions.
All right. Yeah, I agree with that on the Dockers, because I think Dockers are very evolutionary, and a lot of people, they're learning how to use Dockers, and they let people do this, and it seems kind of harmless, and then you start realizing, well, gee, I can go on GitHub and I can download 100 different Dockers for different purposes, and who knows what's in those Dockers. They're lots of fun, though.
Yeah, until your machine goes blank.
Well, yeah, set them up in a sandbox. So I think we don't have any audience questions yet. So if you do have questions, go ahead and post them. My question is what do you think the next evolution of ransomware is that's coming out? Us both panelists. David, what do you think? What's the next one?
Well, I mean, the next one, look, I can predict something, but there's a whole lot of other hackers out there that will prove me wrong, right? I mean,
makes it more fun later.
Yeah. I mean, I do think pre-bundled VMs and ISOs and things like that. I mean, that's just amplifies their attack So I think O'Shea is right, and that's something that we definitely have to be looking out for. Unfortunately, I spend still too much of my time, just in the here and now, where I just sort of see practitioners just not being prepared for what's going on right now, right? Not having some of the protections we talked about, but also I see organizations, not just IT practitioners, but organizations as a whole not being prepared. So they don't understand that ransomware, it's not just an IT thing, that it's a corporate event. And for practitioners, I think you really need to find a way to talk to your management, business owners, and have that conversation that says, look, I'm doing everything I can to protect this company against ransomware, but there's a whole army of people out there who've been trained by governments to come at us. If something does get by what I'm doing, how are we as an organization, as a company, going to manage it, right? Again, take this conversation to the business owner so the business owner understands it's not just an IT problem. And if something does happen, how is the business going to react? Do they have the right insurance? Do they have the right people on board to help out? I did a response last week for a company, and I said, okay, who is your privacy counsel? Who is going to be in charge of helping to notify your clients that their credit card information got compromised, your employees that their payroll and social security number got compromised? And the answer from the business owner was, well, my lawyer is XYZ. And I went and looked up the lawyer, and he's like, a business contract lawyer, right? He knows how to negotiate sales of companies and assets. And the owner was like, yeah, that's my lawyer. He's the guy who's going to handle this stuff. And that lawyer tried, actually. He even oh yeah, I've done some ransomware before. I have some experience. Yeah, he had like one client in the past that did. I mean, this guy, I'm not going to name any names. This guy had no idea what he was doing, but he saw billable hours, and so he said, "Sure."
I get
that's not the way.
I get those calls where it's like in Apocalypse Now when Martin Sheen's crawling through all those trenches, and he there's this guy who's like shooting stuff, and he says, "Who's your commanding officer?" And the guy says, "Aren't you?" And that's kind of the one I get when I'm like, "Who's your privacy officer? What is your insurance provider?" and all this, and they're like, "Oh, I thought you were going to do that."
Yeah, exactly.
I just got here.
Yeah, something it's like you got to realize there's a lot of other people need to be involved, and you don't want it to fall all on your shoulders when the bullets are flying, right? You want to make sure everybody else understands they gotta help out.
And one thing I'd say really quickly is begin to think about where you can shift your defensive prowess, right? Your defensive powers. When you think about, what's actually the more expansion we have into cloud, Docker, different like Lambda, all these different automation tools become open game for attackers out there. So really begin to understand at its most simplistic point, if you can take anything away from it, understanding what your processes look like from, when you throw up a Lambda function from Docker, or when you throw up something from Kubernetes, understanding what the processes look like and understanding what normal activity looks like and creating a baseline against that is like the simplest way to kind of win here. Because what they're essentially going to have to try to do is try to move from a cloud instance to another cloud instance. They're going to hope your VPCs are screwed up. They're going to hope some IAM policy is a mess. And they're going to try to navigate from instance to instance to instance and deploy either ransomware or malware, right? But a quick way to win against that is really setting up some type of baseline. There's a bunch of different tools out there that allow you to do this within ECS and with EC2 instances and, GCP and Azure. You have whatever Twistlock and Threat Stack, all these other tools that are specifically built for this. Start looking into that if you're on the defensive side, because that's where you're going to catch this stuff.
And you're going to have to start doing that API evaluation. I mean,
most definitely.
You're starting to have your applications on site that have so many threads going out to so many different places. And O'Shea was mentioning Lambdas, which are one of my favorite things in the world. And, Amazon Lambda means that you may be pulling in Lambda functions from the cloud. And do you trust these things? Did they change? So understanding that big ball of nightmare that is going to be a modern application is getting a lot more challenging.
Yeah. When you ask where's it going, I think that's where it is. It's like they're going to try to find a way to deploy across multiple cloud instances. They're like hosts are kind of going, that's going to fall by the wayside. Eventually it's going to be, how can I get inside of this whole deployment within whatever three-letter cloud provider you want to throw out
I
there.
mean, if somebody had a popular, API, I mean, if you infected that, it would be all over. I mean, except the cry. I mean, it could infect many, many people all at once, or a Lambda could do the
Yeah,
same
true.
thing because you can throw. I mean, I can write a Lambda today and throw it up there, and if it looks useful, it's like a Lambda Trojan. It's like I don't even know what to call that, but it sure is scary.
I think
Um,
clickbait.
well, I'm getting the signal that we're out of time. I told them this could be a 4-hour session, but David, any final comments?
No, I mean, I think it's you got to be prepared. It's a big fight out there, and the bullets are flying at you from all sorts of different directions, even from the cloud, right?
No plan survives initial contact with the enemy. That's the quote.
That's right.
O'Shea, any final comments?
It's Cyber Awareness Month, so try to learn something new in an
Excellent.
area that you don't focus in. If you're on network, learn something system. If you're on system, learn something about IR. Try to find an area of security you're familiar with and take a
That's
little
great
tidbit.
advice. That's really good advice, and that would be my advice to you too. Is keep learning and keep looking at this stuff. It changes so fast, and I see it every week. I see evolution in ransomware. I see evolution in other areas. Just looking at the news, you're just going, "Wow, that's frightening." Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank O'Shea Bowens and David Sun for being our very esteemed panelists, and all of you in the audience who tuned in. Hope you learned something, and we'll probably see you at the next one. So hopefully someday we'll get to see everybody in person again. But for now, we're gonna wrap the professional section up. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye,
See you
everyone.
later.
I'm not sure what happens now. This is the one where you walk off stage. Oh, there we went. We're off stage.
Okay. Where are you sure?